You're listening to the Cantina Cast, your home for thought-provoking Star Wars talk. Join Albert and Jonesy in breaking down the latest news, trailers, movies, and of course, your favorite characters from a galaxy far, far away.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cantina Cast. My name is Albert Padilla, and this week's episode will be a retrospective look on Order 66 and some of the events that kind of transpired both, before, during, and after. But before we do, I am joined, as always, by my fellow host, Jonesy, confirmed to have been one of the survivors of Operation Nightfall. Jonesy, how are you doing tonight, and how does it feel to still be alive after all these years?
You know, after this weekend, I really severely questioned whether or not I would be alive at all. So happy to be well. And I'd like to tell you, I would never shoot you in the back.
Wow, thanks.
So,
I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Yeah.
You were like down and out there for a while. We didn't think you were going to pull through, but we're glad that you made it.
Yeah, the Sith Lord blood runs deep. Thank you, Emperor Rondo.
All right. Well, let's talk news and stuff happening in and around the Star Wars universe. So we will start with, I guess, more Star Wars Celebration news. And not to be Captain Obvious here, but we're just 2 months away, which seems crazy because it came really quick here. But yeah, 2 weeks away, and we still don't have any word on what day and what time we will be doing our live show. So as soon as we have that, we'll break that to you guys. But the good news is, I think we've heard, at least from Mark Newbold now, that they've turned over the first draft of the schedule. So that's now in the hands of somebody over at Lucasfilm and just waiting approval. So if that gets that approval, we'll know and be able to pass that information on to you all as well.
Yep. So in the meantime, if you want to go over to eargluemedia.com/SWCC, you can sign up. So as soon as we do have info, we'll start notifying people what to expect. We're going to be in the evenings. We'll be able to continue to confirm what day we'll be on the podcast stage so that we can get together, meet up, have a drink, talk chop, all that good stuff.
Talk chop. Yep.
Yeah. Talk chop. Yeah. Wanted to give a quick shout out and thanks to Arturo and Greg for being the latest signups. So we're happy to get their names on the list. Greg's a new listener to the show up in the Chicago area. So appreciate you guys listening, and we will look forward to seeing you out there.
Yeah. And Arturo is pretty active on, I think it's Facebook. He tends to like and share a lot of the stuff that we put up there. So yeah, it's going to be great to put a face to a name.
Excited to see you guys.
Face. Yeah. All right. And just kind of keep this rolling, probably bigger news right now. We've got a new batch of celebrities that were announced today. And then we had some last week that I think came out after we had already finished recording, but we got Ashley Eckstein, Daniel Logan, Jet Lucas, Ken Lung, Katie Cartwheel, John Ratzenberger from Cheers, Peter Mayhew, Donald Faison, John Isaacs, Vanessa Marshall. You want me to keep going here? Who else we got? Myrna Velasco, Michael Pennington. This just goes on and on. Yeah. Tom Kane, Catherine Tabor.
D. Bradley Baker.
There's your buddy D. Bradley Baker. And then Tamura Morrison, Mr. Jango Fett himself. So, yeah, I mean, this list is just continuing to grow, and it's going to grow. And we said it, we knew this was going to happen. They tease us for that first wave. They give you another wave. They give you a third wave. And then finally, we get to the A-list folks when they start announcing some of the people that will obviously be in episode 9 or have been in some of the more recent movies. But this list is not too shabby, huh?
No, it's pretty exciting. I mean, people like Donald Faison are really cool. And I've got to meet Tom Kane before, and Tom Kane is really cool to meet in person and talk to. And like you said, D. Bradley Baker, it seems like he just has so much fun all the time.
Yeah.
That it'll be amazing to be around and be able to talk to for a couple minutes. And yeah, it was surprising. Not as many people knew who Katie Cartwheel was, but she was the creature performer in Solo for, oh my God, what was his name? Rio.
Yeah, Rio. Right.
Sorry. Yeah, man, draw a total blank. But yeah, she did the effects for Rio for the animation. So all of the swinging around in the cockpit was pretty amazing work.
I'm pretty excited about this list, honestly. Vanessa Marshall is another one that
just another good one.
Oh, I mean, I just loved her in Rebels to no end. So yeah, pretty excited about all of this. And yeah, so we'll keep mentioning this obviously as they release more and more names and as the weeks go on. Let's talk about IgerCon.
IgerCon.
So this was the quarterly financial update. What do they call? What's the official name at Disney?
Yeah, the Disney earnings calls.
Thank you. Whatever that is.
Yeah.
Anyways,
we will not do a recap of the earning call again.
No. So yeah, we jumped in. I jumped in. This was my first one, honestly. Jonesy usually is the one that kind of follows us and gives us all the notes, and then we just follow his lead on what we shouldn't talk about. So I was like, yeah, you know what? I'll do this. And Jonesy was busy. Mike was being Mike. And I thought, well, I'll just kind of tune into it. And that was the biggest letdown ever. In fact, I think I had more fun. Like I was just putting in my own commentary, like in Discord as we were listening to it, which I think we should probably make a regular segment where we do that.
That would be pretty good.
It was pretty funny. But yeah, no mention of episode 9. There was really not much mention of Star Wars at all. I think they touched on Mandalorian at one point and whether or not, they were going to be playing with some harder ratings, not for Mandalorian, but just in general with Disney Plus and all of that. But at the end of the day, I think everybody, and there was a lot of buzz, a lot of stuff all over Twitter and Reddit and everything else that, the title was imminent. The announcement of the title was imminent, if not a teaser trailer of some type. And, there was Star Wars show didn't come out, which we now know wasn't because of anything other than one of the hosts just accidentally getting the date wrong. But yeah, there was a lot of buzz because we thought, they would maybe say something about episode 9. I don't think anybody that really knows probably knew they weren't going to announce a title on the earnings call. That's not what that is. Right?
They don't do that. Yeah.
But if there was any chance of them announcing it beforehand, and then it would be something that could be brought up during the earnings call, maybe that would slight possibility. But I think we're just all in a fever right now, waiting for this thing because it just seems like every single day we get more and more hints and
well, and nothing came out with the Super Bowl, and so people, but it's kind of nice. People are starting to get a little interest, a little excitement of what's coming. They know we're on the verge of it. We just don't quite know how close we are to it. And I'm still hedged a little bit. We're still probably a little bit of ways away from it. I think there's still a contingency to think something's happening in February, and would be right on par. I think we've got the last ones, but still we've got a big event in April. So I think that's when we're going to get the deluge of it and start to really get a better picture of it. But, they still touted the parks, because that's coming up. And then also the Disney Plus service. So I think that's when we're going to see the first day of celebrations, actually, when they're supposed to do a Disney Plus unveiling or demo. And wouldn't surprise me if we got a little flavor for the new TV shows that are coming out. So, but beyond that, typical earnings call, nothing super exciting. Although they did come in with a little bit of EA support afterwards, kind of. You want to elaborate on what that was all about?
Well, so yeah, it was the weirdest thing. Go back and listen. I think you can still listen to it if I'm not mistaken, but it was interesting. Someone had mentioned, I don't remember how they got on this topic, but just talking about relationships. So someone asked specifically, what about gaming? Is this something that you guys are going to pursue, that kind of thing? And Iger was pretty candid and mentioned that, we tried it. We realized that's not our wheelhouse and why, Disney Infinity didn't continue the way it was supposed to. He didn't mention that, but that's just my side there. But they really felt like their strong hand was in marketing, which it is, right? And they've got some pretty strong IPs. And so they were going to leave that to third parties to do. And then he went and said something along the lines of, probably going to keep the relationship going with EA. And then he backtracked that and was like, no, he said, we are keeping the relationship with EA. I said something like they've done a pretty good job for us, or they've done well with us for us and that sort of thing. But it was a backtrack. Like he said one thing the first time, and then he realized it and then came back and said, oh no, we are. So, I don't know what the final verdict is. I think, to be fair, he's probably, I think he's not lying. He they probably are considering all options are on the table, and as they should be with a company like Disney at all times. But it's no secret that they really haven't had the best run there over at EA, at least from the fan perspective, from a lot of fans' perspective. So,
how much do you think is riding on Jedi Fallen Order right now for EA and the relationship with the Star Wars license?
Well, considering it's the only thing they got left, I mean, I guess everything. I mean, you place your bets on that thing because that's one of the games I'm actually pretty excited about, especially with what we're talking about today and some of the stuff that we've just talked about recently on the show around the aftermath and the Vader comics and all that. I don't know. I'm interested to see what story they have, left to tell, and how that's going to play out in an actual video game.
Yeah, it's really got to grip you. Otherwise, people are going to just royally trash it. Yeah. And so I'm pulling for them. We want a good game. I'm tired of the negativity with it, especially in the video game space. The Battlefront stuff has been tough to endure, and we've been critical of it too because it's been a day late, dollar short. But man, it'd be nice to have something that we'd say, you know what, this is a fun game to get behind and do that. And in the vein of like some of these Spider-Man games that have been done really well on console games. Mm-hmm. So why can't we have nice things too?
Yeah. What's up with that?
Some may argue we don't deserve it, but
Yeah, that's probably fair.
Yeah.
All right. Well, the next quarterly call, we'll be sure to give you all the exciting details once again. Yeah. And the minute we have an announcement of the title or a teaser, you can bet we're going to do like a 3-hour show. So we'll come back and do that at some point. So, all right. And then the last thing we've got going on is, so we've got a hotline. I'm calling this the Cantina Cast Hotline for lack of a better term. It's kind of lazy, but the phone number is 803-717-CAST, and that's 803-717-2278. So if you'd like to drop us a message, feel free to do so by calling that number. You can leave us feedback. If you've got questions for the show or something that you want to pose for our listener feedback and Q&A stuff, you can do that there. Or if you just want to be a friendly person and say hi to us, we'd love to hear from you. So again, you guys can use that and anytime you'd like. We've already had a few voicemails. I think I've got a way to play those on the show. Jonesy and I think we've just talked initially about just talking about the feedback when we get it and sharing those messages. I don't know if we'll actually put them on there, put them on the episodes themselves, but
depends
that's certainly something we can
they are.
Yeah. If you're dropping F-bombs, buddy, you're not probably going to get onto the show. So, but
see, I thought at first you called it a hotline. I was like, man, maybe Albert's just going to man the line. So it's like a,
right.
a 24-hour support line. Like anybody's got a question or a problem, they can call you up and you could talk them down off the cliff.
I might be willing to do that.
Yeah, man.
Personal advice. So.
That ledge is getting shallow these days, buddy.
Yeah, it is. All right. Well, I think that's all we had for the news. And so with that, let's roll right into our main topic, which is Order 66. So we thought, that looking back at the Clone Wars now, and specifically around Order 66, really hadn't really had a chance to kind of speak about this. And so the approach that we thought we'd take is maybe talk about some of the events that led up prior to Order 66 that kind of got us there. Talk about some of the events that happened during Order 66, and then just a little bit on the tail end of what life was like post Order 66. And you kind of had this first question out there about, how did we view this purge playing out? And I think what you meant by this is prior to us really seeing that all happen in Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith.
Right.
And I guess thinking back, honestly, when the Clone Wars were mentioned in A New Hope, it was beyond intriguing for me. That line of, you fought with my father in the Clone Wars, it just always stuck out for me because it gave you a sense of history at that time, right? That something had occurred, something really major and had occurred so long ago that, we wouldn't know anything more about. And it's just that it's a really quick line that just kind of goes away. But from there, and after we got word that there was this Jedi purge, we were very much kind of left to our own devices to try to come up with how that transpired, who was behind it, how it went down, et cetera. But it was something that was debated on and discussed by a lot of the people in my dark circles when we were growing up. This is prior to the prequels coming out. And I can't say that we ever really came close to, landing anything concrete, especially with how it actually turned out. But it was just so much fun to kind of talk about that and speculate. And I think beyond Vader being behind it in some way, it was really anyone's guess. There were so many theories out there about what the Clone Wars were. What did it mean? What were clones? How were they used? All those, it was just a really cool, 5-second line in that movie that sparked your imagination to no end, which I think was just really great. But how about you? What were your thoughts prior to seeing that all on film?
Yeah, like you said, everything really pointed to Vader for the longest time, that it really kind of made it seem like he single-handedly went out and hunted down every single Jedi and put them out of their misery. And it was jarring. It's kind of weird to believe this has all been like really almost 15 years ago since we got clarification about what actually went down. But it's kind of crazy now to think, like, it's really hard to remember like what it was almost now, because we're so far removed from it about what all the speculation was, 20, 25 years ago when we had nothing to work with. And we always believed it was just Vader. Like, we thought the Clone Wars, okay, maybe that was cloning Jedi, and maybe we had some idea that maybe the stormtroopers were playing into it somehow, but they didn't sound alike. So were they clones? And of course, the Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith really set that going in that direction. But no, we really thought everything pointed to Vader. There was no reason to believe it didn't, because he was, a dark, Jedi turned evil Sith and had all this power and all this ability. So that would just make sense. And that just built his aura up even more than, what it was as we were children growing up with the original movies.
Yeah. And I meant to pull out my old source books. I'm not going to do it now, but my old source books for the West End games, I know I had a section in there where it kind of talked about it in not so specific terms, but kind of to what you were saying. It was just a lot of Vader was behind it and that kind of thing. And that's really all we had to go off of. So, so let's start with some of the more, I guess, key elements and milestones that occurred pre-Order 66. And we'll begin with the clones themselves and the idea of a clone army and the Galactic Army of the Republic. Because while on the surface, it seems to make sense, right? Given the fabricated war that was occurring, it wasn't necessarily the Republic's finest moment in the eyes of many, in the Senate, Bail Organa, Padme, of course, and certainly not looked favorably upon by like the Jedi Council, especially someone like Yoda, who you can visibly see at the end of Episode 2, right? When the clones are all there and we see the ships and they're taking off, he's got he's completely dejected, right? Almost morose in some way, as for fear of a lot of different things, right? But was there really any other choice here at this point? Were those unfavorable opinions on the premise of the war itself, or war without an exit strategy, or was it just something more intangible as like, I've got a bad feeling about this? But what are your thoughts there around why we had certain people, again, like Bail Organa and Yoda, who were just completely broken by the thought of this galactic army that was just been assembled in front of them?
It's got to be perplexing how we can accept that it's generally okay and that we need to take advantage of something that clearly we have zero idea how it came to be. And this is the part that you can definitely understand that. Like there's mystery around this entire event and the series of events that's been going on for decades, and they have no idea what they've stepped into. But the Senate and Palpatine in particular are like, no, this is an opportunity. We've got to seize it and take action. And I think, their backs against a wall. They don't have many choices though, right? They've got this massive droid army. They're struggling to, the Gungans really, didn't really fare all that well against it in the first place. Not that they're a properly trained army, but it was really apparent though that Naboo had no idea, no ability to repel these types of forces. And the galaxy at large didn't really have an organized military of any sorts. At least it didn't seem like it to me. Did it to you?
No. I think you're right. And I'm in agreement. I just don't know that they really did have another option. And that could be part of why we saw Yoda the way he was. He just reserves himself that there really is no other option. I don't like this option. It doesn't feel right. Got a bad feeling about this. I've seen a vision, whatever it is. But I don't know what they would have done differently at this point.
The only thing that we know that they had was like CoreSec, right? Like Coruscant security or these core security type of things that are really limited in scope of what they do. They're basically glorified police officers, more so than actual trained combatants, in this kind of scope and scale. So it made a lot of sense for them to do this, although I still don't understand how the Jedi really endorsed it as wholly as they did. And again, even folks like Obi-Wan, they got a little blinded by the successes that they ended up having as the events started to transpire. It wouldn't have been a victory without the clones. And that's not the right way to think, Obi-Wan. Sorry, buddy.
All right. So I know we just started, but I want to just take a quick step back for 1 second and talk about how or even why the clone army came about. I mean, we get a quick comment about this in episode 2, or is it episode 2? Yeah, I think it's episode 2. But there's quite a bit more about it, and it all starts with Master Sifo-Dyas, right? So for those of you that are unaware, Master Sifo-Dyas began this process of creating the Galactic Army with the what is that stupid name? Kaminoans. Kaminoans. I sound like Mike Rondo right now.
We're Texans, so
yeah, we're Texans. So
words.
But so one of the things that was interesting about him was his force ability. Like one of his bigger, more stronger force abilities was his being able to have force visions, and that's really kind of what started all this. We had another instance where someone thought they had it all figured out because they had the foresight, and yet it goes horribly wrong. So Sifo-Dyas foresaw this impeding war, and to try to get in front of this, right, in preparation of it, he commissioned the folks on Kamino to start the process of like building an army of clones about 10 years prior to the events of the Clone Wars. When he presented this to the members of the Jedi Council, he was turned away. And he wasn't just turned away. They went so far as to kick him off the Jedi Council altogether. So without any more specifics other than that, that does seem like it's a bit severe, even for the council at this point. To me, I don't know if that's fair or not. But I mean, this is a member of the Jedi High Council, and we don't have a lot of information, so we don't know if he was in good standing with the Jedi Council or if he had just had other crazy ideas. But we know that whenever he brought this to them, they were so offended, for lack of a better term, that they kicked him off the council. So it makes me wonder what the heck happened here. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that was a little too much, or was this part of where the Jedi Council was at this point, where they were making these knee-jerk, irrational decisions like this?
Well, I think this couldn't have been the only event. So there had to have been other events with Sifo-Dyas in particular that probably created a pattern. But I can also understand the Jedi perspective on this. This can appear like warmongering. And this can be in direct conflict with the Jedi code of what they're supposed to be there for, and not imposing your will on others and keeping the peace. And again, they're not military. Mm-hmm. And at that point, and again, this is around the time of Phantom Menace, I believe, right? I think is how the timeline kind of fits. Around that time, that's still the Jedi's position is to protect and serve, not necessarily lead a war. And
we got Qui-Gon saying that straight out of episode 1. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that's definitely where they're at. And I could see them saying, no, we've got strict code and we need to abide by that. And if there was a pattern developing, I could see where this would be, okay, this is the next step of kicking them off. Now, we've talked about this before, though, when the Jedi Council takes action, we talked a little bit about it last week or a few weeks ago with the what if scenarios. If they decide not to train or if they kick someone off, what do they expect to happen? And this is where we start to see these paths start to stray, and maybe what was a good intent from Sifo-Dyas trying to protect the galaxy and things like that now have a very dark connotation and dark path start to brew as a result.
Yeah, and nonetheless, Sifo-Dyas decides to go ahead and pursue this dream of starting this army, and he does so on his own. Eventually, word gets out to Sidious and Tyrannus, and they basically arrange for his death. And this is covered in one of the I didn't write the title down. I forget now, but there's one of the Clone Wars episodes where they cover this. But they basically insert themselves into the development of this army. And more importantly, they start funding it, which was always a thing for me. It's like, okay, did the Kaminoans just take this on face value that he comes in and walks in and says, hey, go ahead and start the army. Don't worry, I'm good for it. I don't care what it costs. Just start it. Or did he use some of his own money or whatever? But nonetheless, they got involved. They end up, after he's dead, kind of running things on his behalf and all that. And that's kind of how the army gets started. And Palpatine, this is all part of his grand plan, so he's all willing to kind of pay and front the bill for all of it. So,
right. And then Jango gets in there somehow with Tyrannus.
Yeah, at
some point, a little unclear when he actually stepped in to start providing the genetic template, but it must have been around the same time.
Yeah, and I don't know that. Yeah, it's a good point. I don't know when or how that happened, but it had to be early on. Although they've got the accelerated lifespans too, so. But let's talk about the relationships between the Jedi Council and the clones from the start. I think it's easy to forget, or at least not think about, what the merging of these two forces must have been like in the beginning, because when we did the Clone Wars, and I'm talking about the series itself, we tend to think about all the good, strong bonds and trust and all of that we have, especially, apart from the good times, the Jedi and the clones didn't always get, it seems like it was kind of a rocky start to begin with. And it makes sense because you got, there was probably some resentment, I would assume, on the Jedi's part, at least for some of the Jedi, because they are, like you said, they were peacekeepers and self-proclaimed peacekeepers. And yet here they are now in the midst of the war. And not only are they in the war, but they're actually they're now leading these troops as generals. But did we get any other kind of, we get any other hints about what that was like? I'm trying to think back now on the Clone Wars episodes themselves, especially the early on ones, but what that was like of these two groups, right, with different ideals coming together and clashing and having to kind of fight with a single purpose.
Yeah, I mean, we still get the idea that not all the Jedi value clones as a Yoda would, or an Anakin, or an Obi-Wan, or an Ahsoka, and they don't have that same relationship. And this isn't even the polar ones that we're going to talk about in a little bit here with some of the other Jedi, but it was just more of this. They don't value them as people. They just value them as, fodder in some cases. I need to win. I need to achieve my goals. I'm doing this for all the right reasons, but I'm going to, put my forces out there, and it doesn't matter if they live or die. That's what they were bred to do.
Master Krell, we're talking about you.
Yeah, I mean, and not even to that extent. We had other examples of it. I'm drawing a blank on which one I'm thinking of specifically, but we had some others that didn't have that close-knit relationship to it, that weren't quite as extreme as Krell. But definitely you get Krell that comes into it. And of course, he had ulterior motives, so it's difficult to say that. But there were others that didn't value, they wouldn't lead from the front. They wouldn't go in there and try to save the lives of a few at the risk of many. So, and to the extent that we saw of Anakin in particular with that relationship. But I think generally speaking, though, we had some really great moments where we got to see the uniqueness of the clones and the relationship. The episode with Yoda when they're on the planet and he has them remove their helmets and talks to each of them by name. Yeah, a really great moment. And of course, we get a lot of great character moments, especially as the Order 66, as the conspiracy starts to unravel a little bit. We get some additional great character moments with Tup and Fives throughout the series as well, where we start to see the relationships with the Jedi. And again, this trust and maybe seeds of distrust. And what are everyone's true motives here? And who do you believe? And who's really has your best interest at heart? And we saw the clones often really question about what their place was after the war.
Here's a question I have. Could have or should have Order 66 have been prevented? And I ask this because if you think about it, and hindsight's always 20/20, I know, but when you look back, flags that were kind of apparent, right? You got Sifo-Dyas and his crazy wizard visions that he was having as a big sign. Later, you have Yoda, who has a vision in that the also had the events of the Great Conspiracy that we'll talk about in a little bit here, where you got Clone Trooper Tup's inhibitor ship. Fives, who kind of picks up that ball and almost carries it over the proverbial finish line by exposing Palpatine before Palpatine gets involved and prevents that from happening. But we know he does start talking to Anakin and Rex. And then on top of all that, you've got the Jedi Council, who should be on high alert after the events of the Phantom Menace, and their suspicions should all be pretty suspicious, I would think. But and then you got this all too convenient gift of the clone army that just kind of shows up. But you've got to think that there was something there, and maybe this just kind of speaks to, well, it speaks to a couple of things. I get the dark side, the shroud of the dark side was kind of blinding the Order at this point, right? We all know that, but and maybe it was just Palpatine himself, but it just seems like there was just a lot of signs there, and maybe this is that hubris, the arrogance, and all that we know that they were victims of during this time. But am I being too harsh? Was it harder for the Order and the Senate because they were just so close to it all that they couldn't really see all of that happening before their eyes?
It's really tough to say if this whole thing could have been avoided, especially once you've gone that far to really get embedded with your troops and just embedded in this thing after several years, at that point, you're past the point of no return. Now, early on, again, you got to look at your options and say, okay, do I not accept this army and I just get potentially overrun by these other forces? Is that any better? I mean, so their backs were against the wall already. Palpatine played this right. He played it the best way he could, and then obviously it worked very, very well. But I don't think they could have avoided this in any way. I think every turn they had, Palpatine was another step or two or three above or ahead of everything that they could have figured out to dig them out of this hole. And again, he had this with the inhibitor chip. He had this in play the entire time, and it's just whenever he decided to flip the switch and do it. So if things started would have going a different direction or going south from a path that he didn't want, he could have triggered this anytime he felt like it. And so I just don't know that there was a path that didn't end this way, aside from the Jedi completely walking away. But even still, when they turned their back, execute the order and you're done. And I mean, you could argue the dark side, if they had better clarity, they'd be able to see what was going on and things like that. But I think once the events started, there was no coming back.
That's fair. And hold that thought on the, I guess, the convenience of when it was executed and how that kind of played out. Because I do want to touch on that in just a minute here. Excuse me, but let's focus on the events let's focus on Order 66 itself now. So this is no longer canon, but in Legends, there were like a total of 150 orders, which made up what was called the contingency orders. And some of these kind of just made sense. There was a total of 5, I think, that we got, and 4 that were different from Order 66. But some of them were kind of, I wouldn't say innocuous, but they weren't as severe as Order 66. But maybe the more interesting one was Order 65. But basically said in the event that either the majority in the Senate declaring the Supreme Chancellor to be unfit to issue orders, the Security Council declaring him or would then kind of step in and he could be taken out, the Supreme Chancellor. So it's almost like there was this check and balance in there of those two. But we never really got any more, outside of Legends other than these other orders. And again, the other ones are really not that big. I mean, there's, the capture of a single wanted individual through the mass arrest and threatened execution of a civilian population. So, which seems kind of dark that they would be able to just go in and start wiping out civilians if they were harboring somebody that the Republic was after for whatever reason. But we see pretty clearly, I guess, from an execution perspective. Sorry, joke there. But but Revenge of the Sith, that it was pretty simple for Palpatine just to use this call a clone feature and start this process where he could just order it. But if in the event that didn't work, what was this is where I was going to go back to, what was his end game here? Like all along, it just seemed like the timing was too perfect. And I get it was a movie and it had to be, but the timing just seemed pretty ideal that he had to order it, that he could order this at the time when he had everybody kind of splintered everywhere. He had a lot of the Jedi gone from the temple, which really did kind of two things, right? Number one, it weakened the Jedi temple and made it a lot easier for them to take over. And then two, it was convenient that because the Jedi were scattered, these executions were happening in very, intimate, closed settings. There weren't a lot of people around. There was a lot of skirmishes everywhere. And so it was just kind of, some of this would get lost in the chaos. And then methodically, I guess one other thing too about it that I was always interested in is the fact that he was able to execute this, and he started with the higher ups, right? And we see that in the movie. He took out the heads, if you will, and that's not uncommon. And we do this today, even when we talk about like ISIS and how we are going after, terrorist organizations. We try to go for the heads of these organizations because we know without that leadership, they become weakened, they become desolate, they start becoming desperate. And, it's an easy way to kind of cripple those. And in the Clone War, not Clone Wars, but in Revenge of the Sith, we kind of see that with Ki-Adi-Mundi and some of the other ones that get taken out almost immediately.
And we see with Obi-Wan. So once it all happens, Obi-Wan is lost. He doesn't know exactly what to do without, without Yoda to really give him that direction. And so, yeah, it's smart moves, right? You've got everybody spread apart. So communication is difficult. They can't react fast enough. It comes from within. And unless you're the most powerful Jedi is the only one who really sensed it coming. And it was really just moments before they tried to take him out with Yoda and on Kashyyyk. So it's just one of these things he set it up perfectly. Now, did he have other opportunities to do this? Quite possibly he did, across any time in the Clone Wars. But again, he also had to make sure all of this other things were in place too. All of the political plans, making sure he had all the right power cemented. So some of those other things had to still take place in order for this to be the most effective. And he also had to set the Jedi up to be able to take that fall. So a lot of things also had to take place in order to make that be as effective as it could. But it was, it was just executed perfectly. And again, contingency orders, they all make sense, right? You got to have backup plans. And what's really interesting about how the clones internalized all that is it was always this kind of, song playing in their head. They always had this voice that was basically this sense of distrust, even with all of their loyalty to the Jedi. It was still amazing that one order and it just snaps you out of it or snaps you into one mode and you just blindly follow it.
So going back to Palpatine, I think one thing that's probably obvious, or maybe it's not, but I always saw the deaths of like Mace, Kolar, Fisto, Tin. Then you couple that with Anakin knowing the true identity of Palpatine. I don't know that he had any choice but to execute Order 66 at that point, because I mean, he was already exposed completely. I mean, he really didn't have any choice but to go ahead and pull the trigger, no pun intended, and get rid of everybody, start wiping out all of the evidence, if you will. I don't really know that he had much of a choice, or he would run the risk of being seen as traitorous himself,
Exactly. I mean, this was the right time to pull the death card out.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what he did. Everything was out in the open. So you got to pull it now and execute it flawlessly. And it wasn't flawless, but it worked well enough in order to scatter. And then they can just run down the few that they were able to find, which we saw later on in the Vader comics.
So here's a question for you. Do you think any of the clones were conscious of what they were doing when Order 66 occurred? Even somebody like Commander Cody, which is still like, especially after the Clone Wars, that scene, I mean, it just guts you. Yeah, exactly. But like somebody like Commander Cody, he follows through with like zero hesitation, even after just helping out Obi-Wan just moments before. Or do you think that was, I guess, was it just that cold and black and white for them?
I think for some of them, it was just that sense of duty. I mean, and it was black and white. The chip worked. It did its job, and they knew their orders. And if the Jedi were now traitors, their sense of duty was to the Republic and to the Chancellor, and they were going to carry that out. Now, I would like to think that some like Rex and a couple others would have a different perspective. And I think we saw that. And I think that makes a lot of sense as to why we got so much Rex and not as much Cody throughout the Clone Wars. So we see this bond that we have with Rex and his ability to think a little bit differently, and the experiences that they give Rex throughout that series as compared with some of the other clones of what they would have experienced with their Jedi leaders that may have been more formal and more, command oriented. And so I'd like to think that Rex had a moment to think, even if he already had the chip removed, but that he would have had a moment to think. But quite honestly, this chip was overpowering. We saw that firsthand, that they didn't have much choice except to follow its orders, and they had very little will. And it didn't really seem like they knew what they were doing when they did it. But I don't know, when they were done, I'm sure it was also we did our duty.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's something to be said, though. It may have driven some of them crazy though afterwards.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's I don't remember if it's Fives or was it Tup that was talking about the nightmare finally ending?
Yeah, I think both Tup and Fives. Yeah.
So that was part of it as well. The reason I'd ask that question, or I pose that question, is because I need to go back and read this again. But I remember I don't know if you ever caught the Kanan comics, but I think there was a clone trooper named Gray and he the story, and this is not the whole story. This is like one part of the comic, but at one point there was these two clones, I think, that were chasing Kanan, and this is when he was still a young Padawan. He was on the run after Order 66, and he ends up convincing them not to kill him. In fact, they don't remove their chip, but they almost like fight. They're like willfully are able to go against the Order. And one of them, I think it's Gray, who goes so far as to sacrifice his life in order to save Kanan in that comic series as well. Oh, wow. So, that always, when I read that, it got me thinking about, okay, so there were probably some of these clones who were executing these orders, and they were doing it because it was their sense of duty, but subconsciously or even consciously, some of them may have just been sitting there horrified that they were doing it themselves because they were, turning against their leaders, their friends, and not being able to do anything about it. So yeah, I don't know. Again, I have a lot of sympathy for the clones now, especially after the Clone Wars, but I just can't imagine what that was like. And I'm with you. I think there were some that were like that. I think some were very either aware of it and were able to stop it, and then some that were aware of it and weren't able to stop with it. And I don't know what that was like for them, years later.
Well, and we saw that with Krell too, right? I mean, Krell had his supporters, even though he wasn't treating the clones well. He's like, no, some clones said, no, this is the direction that we're given. We have to follow orders. And so you have some that are definitely just going to do it unquestionably. But you're right. The comments about nightmares and things like that are the ones that make you really wonder, like, what was really happening day in and day out since these clones were bred all the way up until these moments, to where did they always feel like this was always had to happen? And what is that when it actually happens? You're right. Is it the state of like a daydream, or it doesn't even seem real? You have no control, but you can still witness yourself. It's kind of like this out of body experience where you see yourself doing it, but you have absolutely no ability to control it. But your mind is saying this doesn't feel right. I mean, and if that's the case, man, that's maddening. I mean, that's just absolutely maddening.
So you had this question out there about whether or not the clones were seen as saviors from the Jedi, and I think it's a great question, and one that I don't even know that we have a simple answer to. I think, I think it's all about perspective, maybe, I guess, in your certain point of view here again. I mean, I'm sure there were some out there, right, either in the Senate or just the general populace of the galaxy, or even in the Jedi Order itself, who probably felt this way. But I guess if you were, drinking heavily from the Palpatine Kool-Aid, I suppose you would see the clones as saviors and freeing you of the, the Jedi Order oppression. I don't know. What do you think? And before you answer, take this question too.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. That's a great way to put it. It really depends on what their view of Palpatine was at that given moment. Especially with the speech he gives at the end of Revenge of the Sith, where the Jedi have left him, permanently scarred, and they've attempted to take his life. So if you believe that, and if his popularity it seemed like his popularity may have been waning a bit because the war had dragged on and it was starting to get into the core worlds and things like that. But if he was still popular enough, and then they had that attempt, and then he was able to convince the public, and quite honestly, by that point, I imagine the public would believe whatever they needed to believe in order to say, this is why this has gone on for so long. And then he was able to end it so quickly that I would imagine the clones probably did become a bit of a savior. They weeded out this problem within their own ranks, and they took care of this issue. And so I imagine they were looked at more positively, but I imagine, generally speaking, they were still looked at as abominations. I think from across the galaxy, I think in general, that was probably the case from day one. People didn't understand it, a necessary evil, but not citizens by any stretch of the imagination. And we saw a lot of that, like in the Clone Wars, when they'd go to the bar, they had their own sections, and they really weren't thought all that well of. They weren't talked all that well to either, and especially you start bringing in the whole military aspect of it. I think you and I have been around military bases and stuff are, parts of our lives. And we see that sometimes they get a little rowdy when they want to unwind a little bit, no different than any other bar. And sometimes you get negative connotations that go with that, perceived behaviors, even though that's a really small sample size.
Yeah.
But so I think the galaxy may have given them a slight uptick, but overall, I don't think the galaxy were fans of clones regardless at any stage of their life or their career.
So, and then you had probably the darkest question that we'll ask tonight. Did the Jedi deserve this?
Let you tackle that one.
Yeah. I'm going to subscribe to my Star Wars ideals here in that I do believe the Jedi deserve this, but not from what you think. I'm coming at this from a larger cosmic perspective, right? And not necessarily the dark side point of view. I think this was more self-healing and exercising by the Force and abolishing the Jedi as a way to kind of ensure that balance could be accomplished years later. And I won't go so far as to say that Luke felt the same thing, like the Jedi needed this, but I don't think he would argue that it couldn't have happened at a better time given the state of the Jedi Order, their arrogance, their point of view, the lack of quality decision making that we saw. Ask me tomorrow and I'll probably change my mind, but that's kind of how I feel about it right now. What about you?
Yeah, it's difficult to say they didn't deserve it on some level, right? Yeah. I mean, the Jedi meant...
It just feels like nasty saying that. But
well, the Jedi always mean well, right? We want to give them the benefit of the doubt. They want to do well. They want to do right by the galaxy. But when you make bad decision after bad decision after bad decision, at some point it's going to come back and bite you, right? Mm-hmm. And so, did they deserve it? Might be pretty harsh. But is it that cosmic balance coming back into play and finding a way to start righting some of the wrongs? There's maybe an argument there of that's what has to happen in order to start moving things in the right direction, like you said, to get this moved on to the next stage. And the Jedi were in the way of that. And so it's unfortunate that you have to have these really severe reactions to it. But if that's as the Force wills it, then that's as the Force wills it, I suppose. Right. But yeah, did they deserve it? It is pretty harsh. But I know there's some people who are very adamant that the Jedi did this to themselves. And so I thought it was a fair question because I think a lot of people do really firmly believe that, Jedi, they brought it on themselves. So yeah, you got to sleep in the bed you made.
I tell you what, what about those clones who served under the 501st that had a bone to pick with Krell?
Yeah. That's a really great point. Yeah.
If you believe that there was some level of consciousness on their part, during the order of execution of Order 66, you could argue that some of them probably got some satisfaction in removing the Jedi after what that jerk put them through, Yeah,
and you think about it, and yeah, so this order comes about, and you're like, you know what? It all makes sense now. Right. All the Jedi are like this Krell guy. I almost use words I'm not allowed to say, but it just everything comes into place, and it makes sense. And you're right. I think there's a lot of clones who were experiencing that, especially, man, he had them turning brother on brother. That is the ultimate not cool kind of moment. I mean, you don't do that, right? There are certain things that you just don't do, even in the course of battle. You want to say that there's these lines that you won't ever cross, especially with your leadership. And that a Jedi had you do that, you imagine there's a ton of bad blood there. Even if it all seemed to have resolved itself and that was just one bad egg, I bet you there were a lot of clones that said, you know what? I will never trust the Jedi again. I'll do it because I have to. But when they were given this opportunity, I imagine there were some that were like, yep, it's about time.
All right, well, let's kind of finalize this by talking about some of the, I guess, post Order 66 stuff. And we can start with the Jedi, because one thing I always found super fascinating was getting to see Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda working together, fighting together outside of the Jedi Temple. That one scene, it's actually pretty small, but this is, obviously after the dust is settled on Operation Nightfall. It's a very short battle, but it's one of my favorites just because they're just, as sad as it sounds, they're slaughtering these clone troopers just like nothing. I mean, they're cutting through them like butter. But one of the other cool things about this is Kenobi's message that to the remaining Jedi, which we get to see and hear in its entirety in Rebels. And I just want to read this real quick because I just love this. But it says, "This is Master Obi-Wan Kenobi. I regret to report that both our Jedi Order and the Republic have fallen, with the dark shadow of the Empire rising to take their place. This message is a warning and a reminder for any surviving Jedi. Trust in the Force. Do not return to the Temple. Time has passed, and our future is uncertain. Avoid Coruscant. Avoid detection. Be secret, but be strong. We will each be challenged, our trust, our faith, our friendships, but we must persevere. And in time, I believe a new hope will emerge. May the force be with you always. There's a lot in there, right? He starts off by saying that the Order and the Republic have fallen. And from the start, he's basically declaring that not only is the Order gone, but the Republic as they knew it is no more. That now this dark shadow of the Empire, he's calling them out as an evil premise, whatever, but they've now risen and taken place. He's telling them to trust in the Force. He's saying the future's unknown. Don't come back to the temple. Don't come back to Coruscant. You have no home, right? There's no safe haven here for you anymore. He says, avoid detection, be secret. I think of like Koth, Kenobi, Ahsoka, even Quinlan Vos, if you want to throw him in there, right, and how they just kind of disappear from the map altogether. That whole line of trust and faith and friendships will be challenged. I think like Ahsoka and Vader, Kanan and Rex, that relationship and how contentious that was initially for Kanan, and to be able to kind of trust Ahsoka to trust a clone who, he had no real reason to trust him at the time. And I even go so far, I think like Luke in his decision to save his friends versus, complete his training, right? That was a testament of his faith and friendship was being tested there. And then obviously the last line of a new hope will emerge is, obviously Luke, but I mean, you could look at hope from that perspective as Jyn Erso, Ezra, Leia, Rey, Finn, Poe, whatever it is. Right. I mean, this is all post 66, but you could throw any one of those in there as new hopes of things becoming better at some point. So yeah. Anyways, all that to say that I always thought that was fascinating. I can't remember if we got part of that now. Did we get some of that in Revenge of the Sith, or was that exclusive to Rebels that we finally got the full message?
I think we got parts of it in Sith, yeah. Because I think there was a hologram of Obi-Wan.
Yep, that's what it was, right? Yeah, you're right. And then we got to see the whole thing when Kanan was sitting there. Yeah. Doing that. But so let's talk about that. Let's talk about the clone defectors themselves. I mean, we've got Rex, Wolf, and Gregor. We know that they all removed their chips prior to Order 66 and, took up shop over on Selos, which we find out in season 2 of Rebels. And I guess we should also mention that, after Rex removed his chip, he and Ahsoka kind of faked their deaths in order to escape, and they kind of split up and honestly probably never thought they would ever see each other again. But they felt like that was really the thing they needed to do. I'm going to guess it's because of this message, and maybe we'll see that. I think it's going to be kind of cool when we get this new season of the Clone Wars that, when we get to see the Siege of Mandalore, because that's in the siege itself is when we know Order 66 was executed. So I'm hoping we get to see this whole thing play out where they, fake their deaths and go about their separate ways, that kind of thing. But what apart from those three, I don't know that we had any other clone defectors. I mentioned Gray earlier. Did you have anybody else that you came up with?
No, we don't really get any idea of how many. We really don't know what happened to a lot of the clones anyway, as they were, probably retired and whatever that actually looks like. We know they started training non-clones at some point, but
stormtroopers.
Yeah, but we don't really have a great idea of how they were decommissioned. And we get some ideas about it, but nothing really for certain, except for, our three favorites, perspective here after they've left. But again, you're right, though. The battle scars remain, and they all have to live with what they've done and what they've experienced. And clearly some have experienced more than others. I mean, Rex was fortunate enough to be able to take the chip out, but maybe not Gregor. Right. Mm-hmm. And so it's difficult to live with some of that stuff as you go on and trying to rebuild. And man, Kanan showing up had to just throw them complete. I mean, you could see the panic in his face.
Oh yeah.
As much as there was a bit of panic in Kanan's face, the clones probably knew they were in for a fight too, and weren't super thrilled about that because, their prime had passed them by for the most part. But it was, I'm glad we get to see that stuff. And I'm really excited for Clone Wars in this respect too, is to see how maybe we get an idea of actually what all happened leading up to this moment here, and fill in some of those blanks that we got from the Ahsoka novel. And really give us a little bit better idea of, are we going to see any of Order 66? I don't know. I hope we get to see a little bit of, or at least we get some sort of, reference to it. But I don't know if we will. But man, how awesome would that be if we did get a little bit of Order 66 at the very end of the Clone Wars?
No, I'd be all for it. I just think it's going to happen, especially because they've already confirmed we're getting Siege of Mandalore. You got it. You can't do one without the other.
It just seems like it's got to be in there, right?
Yeah. All right. And the last topic, I guess, is just I want to quickly just kind of touch on the Galactic Senate, because as a result of Order 66, Palpatine declares himself as Emperor. It was now, an autocracy, and the name was changed to the Imperial Senate. But this is the part that always bothered me, and you mentioned it earlier. But this idea that people that were part of the Galactic Senate, or now the Imperial Senate, were just simply okay with the narrative that Palpatine had created, because there really is no. He didn't have a whole lot of evidence. A lot of it was just him coming out and saying this is what happened. So, was this just utterly plausible, or do you think that some of these senators were just shills and that they blindly followed Palpatine and took everything he said on at face value because they were kickbacks in there, or they had they were politically motivated to follow him? And I'm probably drudging in some of our own politics, our real life politics here, but it just seems kind of odd that he was able to convince them. And you brought up a good point. The war had been going on for so long, and in some of their eyes, they may have seen this as the end. And so they were just kind of falling in line with the next steps here. But I really struggle with the fact that as many people that were part of that Senate, that the only two people that really had any kind of rational thought or that seemed grounded enough were Padme and Organa. But I don't know.
And there were a handful of others too, right? So they weren't the only ones. But you're right. This is a massive body that we're talking about. It's not 13 people or 100 people. This is this is thousands of people, right? So you're right. But I think some of it is you have to look at the events. You had a battle going over top your home world, your core capital world, and when that happens, the war is on your doorstep. And I think for a lot of politicians, they always feel like they're completely removed from it. We feel like a bit like this in the United States, right? Not a lot of things happen on our own soil. Everything seems so far away. But when it happens, it's a very panicky type of feeling because it just doesn't seem like it should or could. And so I imagine with the politicians that when that happens, you tend to grasp on things that you feel like you can do. And Palpatine had positioned himself in such a way that I believe that he was able to be that first thing that they grasped on because he was powerful. He had a plan. He was well organized. He was calm and was able to articulate what they needed to do. Now, I think you're right, though. I think he had plenty of political manipulation and political capital in order to spend, and he's working that constantly. And we got that in the Vader comic as well when, Vader accidentally dropped a speeder on a senator. So it's one of these things that he's always got something working to further his agenda in whichever way that makes the most sense to do. And he had been working this so long in the Senate that I imagine there was a lot of that already at play to where he didn't have to work too hard to maintain that trust. And most of his focus from then just had to maintain it rather than to keep developing it. Yeah. So I think that's largely what it was, but at the same time, I don't think that was all it was. And when the panic hit, they're just going to reach out to the first thing they think they can help out. And Palpatine was always there. Like, I will take care of this. We'll get through this. And you go to your bedrock. Well, the joke's on you guys because as soon as that Death Star was built, he got rid of you guys. So Who's laughing now? Well, too soon. Excuse me. Too soon. Sorry. Yeah, that was. So that was it. That was really kind of all we had really to talk about Order 66. Hopefully, we did it justice, and you got something out of that. Yeah, one of the interesting things before we jump off this is we talked a little bit about the clones that they have an issue with taking out the Jedi. You brought up Obi-Wan and Yoda taking out clones. Do you think they had any reservation about killing clones? I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, not at that point. Yeah, so that's the other side of the coin, right? The expendability of the clones, and when they turned on you, you had no issues. And they might call it defense, but I'm sorry, Yoda was throwing lightsabers through the chests of clones and stuff. Oh yeah, they didn't pause to ask why, and we saw that with the conspiracy too, right? they were quick to say that something was wrong with the clones and not believe the clones. So you can understand that distrust. But anyway, I just thought I wanted to bring that up before we got off the subject entirely.
Yeah, I think it's a fair question. If I was in that same position and they just, I knew they slaughtered everybody that I knew and loved, and I didn't really because I don't think either Obi-Wan or Yoda really understood what was happening. So in that instance, when you're kind of left to, you're in a corner, painted into a corner, you've got your backs up against the wall, whatever you want to use there, it's fight or flight. And I think at that moment, they're no longer thinking about these as clones. They're not thinking about the relationships. All they're doing is trying to survive. And if that means, the execution of these guys to get them out of the way, to find out, if there are anybody else that from their side still left and alive that need to be rescued or saved, or to ensure that the order continues or, peace continues, whatever it is. Yeah, I mean, I think they're unapologetically just slaughtering these guys left and right, and we'll ask questions later kind of thing.
Yeah, sure.
So,
I mean, and they were vastly outnumbered. So, I mean, it makes sense. But I was just saying more in the macro way of thinking about it.
Yeah, no, I get it.
Yeah.
All right. So let's, so anyways, that's all we had really for Order 66. But before we go, we got a couple quick shout outs. I want to bring up Josh in Michigan, who reached out via Facebook, to let us know that he'd been enjoying the Mortis coverage that we did. So both episodes there. He had a really interesting theory that Palpatine was kind of implanting these visions in Padme, about Padme dying into Anakin's head. And that was kind of stoking his fear. He was kind of playing on the loss of his mother there, which I thought was pretty intriguing. In Small World, Josh actually lives about 2 hours south of where I was born in Michigan. So from one Michiganer to the other, sup, bruh. And you had one, I think, we had one that came in from iTunes.
Yeah, I don't know how to pronounce this. Triduckmore from Great Britain had a really awesome review for us. I really enjoy this podcast. Albert and Jonesy are true fans that have a great rapport and have built upon the community of love of Star Wars content established by Mike and Joa. So settle in and enjoy. So thanks so much for the review, and glad you're enjoying the show, and encourage anybody else, if you'd like to leave us a review on iTunes or any of the other services, we'd love to hear from you, or you can shoot us an email and we'll give you all the contact info here in a minute.
Yep. And we'll put that, we'll get all that stuff in the show notes, and don't forget the hotline. We got that as well. All right. Next week, we are going to cover some of the Age of Republic comics that have recently come out. We may talk a little bit of Qui-Gon Jinn. We'll have to see. But in 2 weeks, we've got the listener feedback and questions. So we're ready to do one. We've got quite a bit of questions already here. But if you'd like to leave us a question to be asked on the show, you can do so by reaching out via the social media links. We'll put some stuff out there here in the upcoming week. Where you can kind of reply there, come on to Discord. You can post your questions in one of the channels that we've got set up. You can do it via email, or if you want to call the hotline, you can do that and leave your question for us there. So again, we'll put all the links in the show notes so that you can do so. So that'll be again in 2 weeks that we will do another listener feedback show. All right, last words before we go.
Nope, do what must be done. Let's get out of here.
Wow, too soon, man, too soon. All right, we'll see you guys next week.
See you.
You're still listening? Wow, that's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property and all that other good, fun stuff, but I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. If you can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me, and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what, so that's your disclaimer.